You can give somebody an apartment or a bed in the community, but that's different than being part of the community when you feel like you really belong, when you feel like you're missed if you're not there, when you feel like you're valued. That's the difference. And that's what the community facilitator role is about, creating that atmosphere.
G'day, I'm Debra Caldow. Welcome to the Red Giraffe Solutions Expanding Worlds podcast, where we aim to support you as you help your young person with additional needs plan for their future, a future where they're safe, secure, and live a rewarding and fulfilling life. From around the world, I share stories and I share solutions from people making this possible right now. I'm a parent of a young person with additional needs, so I understand the challenges. Many of the people I've interviewed on this podcast have already helped me design a better future for my daughter, and I hope that they might help you as well to imagine what's possible for your young person. This podcast is made possible by Red Giraffe Solutions, which is a project I'm proud to be part of, supporting families to build a better future for their children. We now have available at Red Giraffe Solutions an online course called Independent Cooking Made Easy. This is a new and unique approach we developed when we realised traditional cooking techniques and recipes were never going to enable our daughter to cook without some support or supervision. It's a safe, simple system that uses no more than 5 ingredients, has no weighing, cutting or chopping, and no lifting of heavy dishes. Each of the 16 recipes in the course includes a step-by-step video of our daughter making the meal, plus a visual recipe card. We developed this for our daughter to solve her challenges with cooking, and every recipe in the course she can and does genuinely cook for herself. You can find a link to the course in this episode's show notes. Community is defined as a group of people who share a common characteristic, interest or location. But when I think about community, I think about words like belonging, and by virtue of that, acceptance, and about support of the people around us in our community. And I think we're all pretty aware of how much there has been a breakdown in community and how many more people now feel that they don't really have a community around them. For me, community has always been one of those things at the centre of the planning that we've done for our daughter to secure her future when we're no longer around. And more often than not, our community is built around where we live. So continuing on from last week's episode, I'm speaking to Laura Wells from Hope. And in this week's episode, we learn more about the housing model that they've developed, or pivoted to, really. It's one I've not seen done this way before, but one that I think you'll see makes a lot of sense when you hear about what they're doing with their community facilitator role. So let's hear more from Laura about this and the other work being done at Hope. Laura, thank you so much for talking to me today. Can we start off by you telling me a little bit about you and then also your role within the organisation?
I am originally from North Carolina and went to Duke undergrad, and then was inspired while I was there to visit a large community in Honduras. And that really inspired me to think there's this whole world out there that I know nothing about, had never been out of the country. As many of us do, live a sheltered life in the sense of not really understanding just all the diversity of people that are out there, including people of different abilities, disabilities. So after college, I decided to volunteer for a year in a large community in Scotland. And that really changed my life. By being there, I thought I was going there as this psychology major. I was going to do such great, wonderful, helpful things. And I think like from the day I got there, I realized that I had a lot more to learn from the people that I was living with than I had to give. When I came back to North Carolina, I was going to originally get a PhD in psychology and teach or do research. That inspired me to instead get a master's in social work because I realized that I really wanted to work with people, not kind of learn about them and study them. I wanted to really be in relationship with people as a way to transform the world kind of one by one. That's been my philosophy throughout my life, is what I can do in the here and now with people, just in those connections. Then my then boyfriend and I got married, and due to his clerkship, we moved to Florida for a couple years and then ended up in Atlanta. And one of the reasons we ended up in Atlanta was there was a group of people wanting to think about starting a large community in Atlanta. So I was excited about living somewhere where there was a large community because I wanted to be affiliated and be part of it. And then over the next 12 years, we worked to start the large community in Atlanta that opened in 2012. In the meantime, professionally, I was working as a social worker and from the beginning worked with people with disabilities. In the meantime, we adopted two children. So as I was wanting to work less hours to be home more with them, I did a bunch of contract work, including with adults in employment, support for adults with disabilities, and some consulting with families doing their educational plans in the school system. And then in the meantime, Large Atlanta was getting off the ground. And so I learned how to develop a board and how to fundraise, how to network, develop programs, policies, procedures, like all the stuff it takes to run an organization. And then we moved back to North Carolina in 2020, and my husband got his job here. He's the director for the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities, and he started that role in January of 2020. And then the kids and I were going to follow in May of 2020, which we did, but he ended up getting sent home because of the pandemic to work remotely. So we still moved in May 2020. Everything was shut down. I wasn't sure how that was going to work for me professionally to find the role that I wanted with everything shut down. So I just took a year off and then started some volunteer work, which led me to the Hope Founders. And when I heard where they were, they had been meeting since 2018 and were really struggling to gain traction with a developer or finding land. It was just the three of them. So I said, I did all this in Atlanta for L'Arche, so I'd be happy to volunteer with you, get your board started, do some fundraising. And so I did in 2021. And then we raised enough money that year that they hired me in 2022 to be their executive director. At first, I was not sure about taking on the role. I've never been an executive director before. So when we started working together and realized how much I enjoyed working with the three of them and how good it was going, and they offered me the job, I thought, you know what, this is a great marriage of the things I've been doing because there's still a lot of direct interaction with adults with intellectual disabilities and their family members. And then there's the component that I'm really good at organization, I'm good at networking, and I'm good with people. And so it just fits. I took the leap and joined them, and they took the leap. I think it was a mutual leaping to see how it would work. And I think it has been great. I've really enjoyed it. It was hard to lose Dottie and Aura, but I think by the time they had decided to move out of state, we had really put roots into the effort of our collective impact and bringing together partners. And so it didn't feel like I was alone in it. And with Ginny, Ginny is amazing. I could not do this without her, but we also have all these community partners now that I never feel alone. I always have someone to turn to with questions or when I need support. So it's been a really good fit for me, I think.
How does the day-to-day organisation of Hope run? Because as I understand it, you've got different communities with the community facilitators. Can you just talk about how it's set up at the moment and where you'd like to see it go?
Sure. When we pivoted to say, okay, it's going to take a while to find land that's affordable, to create a community that we want, which is that anyone can live in, not just people who are wealthy who can afford to pay thousands of dollars every month. When we decided to pivot and say, let's look at, and part of that came from the fact that we have so many great community partners. We said, let's work with people who are already developing housing. Like we've got all these great partners. Let's work with them. So that's how we started first with the North Street project, because one of our board members lives in North Street and works for Reality Ministries, who's another one of our partners. And so when they said they really needed support and we really need to be able to create inclusive communities, it was just an easy way to say, we'll support you with a community facilitator. And in return, we will provide an evaluation consultant to measure what we're doing there so that we have then the impact to show to other funders and to other partners who may want to do this. And they said, absolutely. That's how we started there. As you said, we have a community facilitator that works there. And then about 3 to 6 months later, we got this project up and running with two other partners, Alliance Health and CASA, who's an affordable housing developer. our progression was, let's start with a community that already has people with and without disabilities living in it. Then this next community, let's support 10 people as they move into a community. So there'll be people with and without disabilities in it. And then ultimately, we'd like, our next project, we're talking to some of the developers who are in the process of getting land to build a community, and we will integrate some people into it, but we'll have more input as to how things are developed as it goes. And then maybe down the road, we will actually start with the developer from the ground up by finding a piece of land and making a project from the beginning together. So, how the day to day operations work currently, we all work remotely. We don't have office space. As the executive director, I supervise the two folks who are the community facilitators. They don't live in the communities, they live outside of the communities, but come into those communities for 20 to 25 hours a week. They are physically on site to meet one-on-one with the different residents. They find out how things are going, what their needs are, like where there might be gaps, like if someone's having trouble getting to work on time, or if someone is really wanting to have more social activities. They figure out through the relationships they develop what those needs are, and then they work with the person to find resources and supports. And sometimes it might be travel training with someone to figure out how to work the bus system that's nearby to get to where they need to go. And sometimes it might be, let's sit down and make a phone call together to your supervisor at work. They also work to develop programs and activities where all the residents will come together and further develop those relationships. We call that increasing natural supports, so that there's paid professional supports and then there's your natural supports. And much like all of us, we depend on our friends to provide us emotional support when we're down. We depend on maybe a family member when we're sick to provide us physical support. We depend on neighbors for that kind of casual interaction, or I need to borrow a cup of sugar, or I have this book I just read, I think you'd like it, that kind of thing. And so that's what we're really aiming to develop and what the community facilitators focus on. So they spend their time in the community, either one-on-one with residents or doing programs that are more group programs, like setting up a book club, getting it going so that the residents are then meeting weekly in one or another apartment for the book club. So not everything is done by the community facilitator, but he might or she might facilitate its development and then how it's going to keep going without him or her. Then I meet weekly on Zoom with each of them separately, and then we meet together as like a team once a month. So they can compare and contrast how things are going in the different communities, see what works for one another, borrow ideas from each other, solve problems. And then we have our monthly community events. So we host community events once a month, which are social activities open to all. And then we have the whole other arm of the organization, which is the collective impact work. We work closely with the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and we have a contract that we pay someone with their community practice lab to facilitate all these meetings that we have. That's where the work of the how are we going to make this happen across the state? So it's who are the partners that we need to do it locally, and then how can that happen elsewhere? And how do we get rental assistance to be a statewide thing so that it's not, how are you going to afford this every time you build one of these communities? There's a lot of complicated housing laws and money that comes from the federal government to the state government to the locality. So we're working on all these levels with that collective impact work to try to say, first of all, there's a reason why this hasn't happened before in North Carolina, and we're trying to reduce some of those barriers.
Is funding the only reason it hasn't happened, or is it just a perception that people maybe can't live independently in the way that you're talking about?
I think it's more a lack of knowledge and understanding that this problem even exists or is a problem. I think a lot of people just think, oh, those people with disabilities, they're fine wherever they are. In fact, we often talk about how family members and their loved ones are almost imprisoned in their house as they age because they can no longer get out and about safely with their loved one. And their loved one doesn't really have any other way to get out and about. So they're just stuck at home. So nobody sees them, nobody thinks about them, or thinks about the fact that what does happen when their caregiver dies. Most likely, they're going to go to an institution or a segregated group home setting because that's the emergency backup plan that there is from the state. And as we know, the numbers of people with autism are rising. People are living longer. It's going to be a crisis. It already is a crisis, but people just don't know about it. So I think, yes, lack of funding is an issue, but the reason there's a lack of funding is because all the funding in North Carolina and many other states has been directed into these congregate group home settings. That works, is what everybody thinks. And what we at Hope say is it works for some people, but there's a large percentage of people who don't want to live in that kind of congregate setting. And it doesn't work for them. And what the federal law is saying now, and what states have been told they need to be in compliance with, is that people have the right to live in the community. So the money you're paying to go for these supports in the congregate settings could easily go to be supporting people to live in the community in their own home. There's no reason other than just the lack of structure, the lack of policies that make this easy to do.
It's interesting you're saying there you want people to be able to afford it. And obviously, the more money you have as a family, you can set things up. But if you haven't got a lot of money, that's a massive barrier already.
I think you're right. The folks who are well connected and well resourced already, they know who to call and who to contact. And so they get routed to us. And that was how Hope NC started, is this group of parents that were amazing advocates. We're part of this larger group of advocates. And so, yes, that's one segment of the population. But I think as we have grown and as we have done this, got the funding for the collective impact work and started bringing in more partners, including these affordable housing developers, this is a whole new segment of the population that is not as resourced and not as connected. And so I get emails and calls from new people like every day that have heard about us through one of those affordable housing partners or through another disability organization or through the state Medicaid program, because those are all our partners. And so they know that we're trying to solve this problem and that we have these pilot projects. Unfortunately, they're small, 10 people here, 20 people here. So we're not going to solve the need that's out there right away. But we do see it as, by doing these smaller projects, we're solving the greater problem of why it can't be done easily and reducing some of those barriers that are going to create more and more opportunities for this kind of housing across the state. We still have work to do to reach people who have less resources. Absolutely.
When I'm talking to you, what's striking me as really interesting is it's almost like what you are doing at your organisation is having this community facilitator is basically bringing the community together. So you could go into any community. It almost feels like that could be scaled, almost like a provider of community facilitators. And I don't want to simplify what you're doing. That's one of the things that's making it work really well for you guys. Is that the case?
That is right. And I do often say that's at the heart of our concept, is that community facilitator role. And there is not currently a service provider that's doing this. And we are in talks with some of our connections at the State Department of Health and Human Service level about, is there a way that this could be funded through Medicaid funding, this role, so that it could be offered, like you said, anywhere there's a community. It's tricky, though, because if you scale it too big, the danger is it then can become institutional. We created a North Carolina Inclusive Housing Coalition because there's all these parent groups across the state who, like Ginny, Dottie, and Aura, have gotten together and said, we want to do this ourselves. So we're supporting each other in this coalition. And often we'll hear someone say, we just want to build or buy this great big building and put people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in it. And my heart clutches, because while we want to support anybody and everybody that wants to do housing for people, how do you keep that from becoming just another institution? Not that it can't be done. Potentially it could be, but that is not what we're about. Like you said, as Hope NC, we're about creating the community. Ginny and Aura and Dottie would often say, you can give somebody an apartment or a bed in the community, but that's different than being part of the community. We all know what the difference is, right? Like when you feel like you really belong, when you feel like you're missed if you're not there, when you feel like you're valued, that's the difference that we are about. And that's what the community facilitator role is about, creating that atmosphere.
So, in terms of the future for Hope, you're going to continue with these sorts of projects, but long term, you want to build your own communities. How likely do you think that is to happen, given all the funding challenges and the government barriers? And I guess that's a more general question about how you see this all happening in the future and whether you can see change happening, or it will depend on these partners that you have rather than looking to the state.
That is a great question. And I think what I'm trying to do as a leader and what I'm trying to encourage our organization to do is to stay open and flexible because we've already seen how a pivot really brought great things. We were stuck in this atmosphere where it just was feeling like it might never happen. And we were able to pivot and open ourselves to this new way of creating inclusive communities. And it's only been a year and it has opened a ton of doors, a lot of conversations. We are seeing change. So at the state level, even in the past year, there have been a lot of things happening. And I'm not saying we were the cause of all of those changes. There's also other things happening in the state that are priming the state for this type of inclusive housing to happen. And there's a whole history of like the state being told, you need to do this. You need to support this kind of community living for folks. And so that happening at the same time that we're starting these pilot projects has meant that things are moving fast track. And that makes our ability to make new partnerships and create more of this housing easier. So I feel more hopeful now than I did a year and a half ago that we might actually build a community from the ground up because of all those changes. And I also am open and flexible to the fact that maybe the way we're being pulled to go is to actually, like you said, create an organization that supports community facilitators working across the state in different communities. I don't rule that out because every day I'm learning more about what the need is, what the structures are, and what the funding is. I see either a combination of both and, like we're going to support community facilitators, be a provider of those, and perhaps build our own community someday, or perhaps we're just going to be doing what we're doing now, which is finding partners, integrating people into community and providing the support. And then we do it in another location, and show others how to do it.
I believe the community facilitator idea is one that is very transferable anywhere, and one that I'll certainly be exploring more. And I think as well, how Hope are ready to adapt to how external factors change is an approach worth copying, especially as the end goal still remains the same, to ensure that our children get to live somewhere where they feel valued, where they feel that they belong, and where they would be missed if they weren't there. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope that the stories and solutions shared on here help you as you support your young person to create their future. If you know anyone who would find the ideas useful, please share the podcast with them. To support the podcast, please consider finding out more about the Independent Cooking Made Easy online course. It's a safe, simple system that works. There are links to the course in the show notes. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn at Debra Caldow. I'd love to have a conversation with you on any of the topics we all care about. Bye for now.